Hello, everyone. Welcome to 2022. I think Emo said that last week, but now's my chance to. And welcome back to .NET API Reviews. Today we have, surprise, surprise, some red issues, but my screen isn't full, so maybe we'll get through everything today. For those of you confused as to why I'm not speaking in German right now, I feel that not too many people really cared or were excited. If you disagree, certainly let me know, and maybe I'll bring back German. Maybe I'll start rotating languages. I think the traditional YouTubies for this is leave a comment below. Yeah, all right, let's get started. Activity context try-parse should support isRemote 42575. Tadek.
Yeah. Okay, so we already have activity context. This is a read-only struct. And we already provided in .NET 6 or 5, I don't remember, the APIs that to parse. I mean, like you can give it like two strings, trace parent and span, the trace and span, and it can parse it to activity context. That's fine. I mean, like the only problem here is activity context has also another flag. It's not part of the context, but it's just a flag telling like if this context is remote context or it's local context. And the point is like everybody want to parse the activity context and in same time to initialize the isRemote. They don't have easy way to do it except if they do it in two steps. I mean, they need to parse first, and after that, they need to recreate activity context, a new activity context with the flag is set, because activity context is read on. So this issue came multiple times. I mean, from the OpenTelemetry side. I mean, like people, because isRemote, this is the flag I'm talking about. isRemote is used a lot in the OpenTelemetry. I mean, so anyone want to parse the activity context and initialize isRemote flag, they need to do it in two steps. I think I mean, if you go down, I wrote the alternative here. This is the method. I mean, like, you know, this is a helper method. They can do that. So they need to parse first, and after they parse, they need to recreate the activity context with the parsed information and adding the isRemote flag to it. Of course, I mean, like, you know, it's simple for anybody can do that, but this means that any user want to parse and initialize isRemote flag, they will need to repeat this stuff. So we just providing this to be first to be more convenient, and second to avoid to have every user to do this. I mean, maybe they can do it wrong or whatever.
Seems reasonable to me. Is there anything else that would need to be added in the overload, or is this covering all the fields now?
No, this is covered all the field. Yeah. As I mentioned, isRemote itself is really not part of the context as a concept, but it's just a flag telling like if this context is coming from remotely or it's just locally.
Fair enough.
And this is why we didn't include isRemote in the first place.
Yeah. On the one hand, I sort of agree with the middle proposal of having it as a default at the end, but if this is, yeah, it's fine as a proper overload. I don't. All right. Any mild feedback from anyone? No one has strong feedback. All right, sold. Okay, 63353 activity is stopped.
Yes, this is another API requested also from the OpenTelemetry side. This is needed to implement this functionality inside the OpenTelemetry SDK. So basically, I mean, we have the activity class, which is you can create activity object to publish any tracing. And when you create the activity object you started, I mean, so to be like a current object that you can add the tracing to. And after you finish, you will just dispose it or stop it. But OpenTelemetry specs, I mean, they need to allow that to tell at any time if you have any object, I mean, activity object, or they call it span. If you have this, I mean, you have to know that if it's already started or it's stopped. So we don't have any way to tell that the object is already stopped, except, I mean, like, you know, we have something else in the activity. It's called duration, which is like, you know, when you stop it, we set the duration about like, this is how long the tracing took. I mean, from starting to the stopping. But unfortunately, I mean, like, we have another API that you can set the duration of the activity object even before stopping it. So duration cannot be used to tell if it is object is stopped or not. So this is just a simple API. I mean, like, you know, can just tell about, like, you know, if the activity object is stopped, so it will tell you it's stopped. Otherwise, it will tell you no.
Is there a way to tell if it started?
Yes, because like if you created and you didn't start it, so you will not get like what we call it like a span ID for it. So when you start it, you will start assigning a span ID for the activity, and you can tell if it's started.
Okay.
Also, in our new APIs that we exposed during .NET 5 and .NET 6, we always create and start the activity object in just one operation.
Sure, I'm just looking at your usage here, and you have created, assert it's not stopped, then started, assert it's not stopped. So it's, do we have a way of asserting that it has started? That was also in your description of the spec says you need to know if it has started and if it has stopped. So
yeah, starting is easy to tell.
fair enough. Anybody have feedback?
It seems fine.
Click, I promise. Okay, we're just flying through these. 36753 path assembly resolver metadata load context should be sealed or allow overrides. Those are words.
Yeah, so this class is public class and having this private field, which is used in the resolve method. And therefore, it cannot be used when developers want to have a derived class from this and use it by their needs. So he's suggesting to make the field protected, or alternative design is make it add the property to access it.
Makes sense. Is deriving from this class common? Is what features are they trying to enable here?
No, I'm not sure, but I mean, right now it's not usable at all, so I guess I couldn't say it would be common. So,
well, whatever behavior they're trying to unlock, is this the path that we want them to go down, deriving from this class, or is there some other way we'd like?
The other way is just completely copying the class and creating like similar one per se.
Because the interesting description is seal it or let it work, and we certainly have most of our types have the interesting middle ground of no. So if it's to another version of Corey's question is if they suggest sealing it as a viable option, then why are they extending it?
I mean, I don't think it was intended to seal it. Like, people, if they would like to use it, it's just become not reusable if it's private, right? So.
Okay. Pretty sure our answer is straight up. Yep. Do not provide instance fields that are public or protected. So this proposal is dead.
In that case, I have a property.
Yeah.
I don't think providing a dictionary as protected is necessarily a good idea either. I think the right abstraction there would be to potentially provide some protected methods for adding and removing items to the private dictionary. That way you could, in the future, change the backing instance to be an immutable dictionary or some other collection type if that's determined necessary for perf or other reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, really, it's extensibility needs to be designed, not just slap the word protected somewhere. So whatever the use cases of exposing this data is should be well defined and not just a free for all.
Yeah, I would probably ask for more feedback on exactly what they're trying to accomplish here. Like, this is the how, but what is the what? And then we can develop some different APIs, like Tanner said, for that.
I mean, by my understanding, it's just need to be used in the resolve method, abstract resolve method this class has, and nothing more than that. Don't need to really access it more than that.
Okay.
Looks good.
All right. 63381, an analyzer for detecting multiple enumerations. Is this still you, Booyah?
No, Shechinten.
Yeah, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, so, all right, so, yeah, my name is Shen, and I'm from the Rosalind team. So I created this proposal about weeks ago. Actually, I read the analyzer about before the holiday. So basically, as you see in the proposal, so this is an Yeah, this is a writer compete item, in fact, from our PM. So, if you have used ReSharper, or rather, they have a kind of the similar analyzer which detect the possible multiple enumeration over something like enumerable or something other. Yeah, enumerable T, and I-order enumerable. So we have some customer requesting that, and here is some example I give for the. So pretty much this is some existing example of this. And can you go down? Yeah.
So,
So
I have literally no idea what this means. What is that? C sharp?
oh yeah, this is C sharp. So basically, yeah, sorry. So maybe can I share my screen? Maybe I can use other. So
I think
maybe
it's just showing the scribbling section.
Yeah, so
where the analyzer will run.
Oh, this is the test
Yeah.
nomenclature,
Yeah.
not the
Yeah.
that. So there's not a thing you can write that is legal. Open square bracket pipe. I'm like I don't even know what the like absolute value of a. Okay, all right, I get it now. Yeah, I can. If you think sharing your screen would be helpful, remember to clear anything off that you don't want streamed on the internet.
If this squiggle is hard to understand, I can share my screen. But if you can understand, that's pretty good. So basically, it says this is the position which we flag the diagnostic. So as you can see, maybe example 3. So which means enumerable I and dot element at 10. It means so I is enumerated here, and then it's also enumerate at the for each loop below. So basically it means that this I is enumerated for twice, and we want to report a diagnostic to report to the user and let them know this is something perhaps hurt their performance. Yeah, and this is the message and the description is also here, and its category is performance, and by default, so right now this analyzer is implemented similarly to the platform compatibility analyzer, so which based on the data flow analyzer. Perhaps it's it has not been well tested for the performance. But so far we want to actually disable it, and and also I think the next time we are looking for enable it is by .next 7. So that's a plan. And so something I really want to discuss here is the implementation details part. So basically the interesting part for this analyzer is to know the kind of method that's I will say the kind of link method we're interested. So basically the first one is to know will this method will enumerate a certain argument. So can you go above a little bit? Yeah, this is the first part. Sorry. Yeah, so for example, it's like the element at, aggregate, and also can expand the squiggle, the full, here. So basically, this is all all the methods here I hard-code in Analyzer so far, because I don't find anything else, any other good ways. So basically, all these methods will enumerate an enumerable instance, so which which I feel it's not an extensible way, and also if in the future maybe Link has added some new method, we need to manually update these. So perhaps that's why I'm here. That's why this is created here. So
what happens if the enumerable is passed to something not in this list? It's just a no-op. It's treated as
currently
not a problem.
Currently I treat it as not enumerate. So so if you are passing to your own methods, you will not be able to use an analyzer so far.
But okay, but if I pass it to my own method, I'll still get warnings for other places where it was passed to one of these, but I won't get warnings on my method, which might be false positives or false negatives.
Yeah.
Is it worth, instead of hard coding, introducing some sort of attribute to put on these methods?
Yeah, I put the attributes design in the below I think it's the under the implementation part. So if we're interested, we can go down to see that. Can you?
Well, I mean, like,
we don't have to skip ahead. It was just a thought.
It actually just feels to me like if any method takes an IEnumerable, assume it iterated it. Like, if you have an IEnumerable and you pass it to two different methods that take IEnumerable, it's probably been enumerated twice.
Yeah. So that's possible.
Although that's going to potentially, how does that interact with number 2 below? Like, you pass an enumerable to select, but it doesn't enumerate it. It produces a new enumerable.
I mean, if you pass something to select, granted that creates a new enumerable, but if that enumerable gets enumerated, you're going over the primary thing twice. So, like, there's, to scroll back a little bit, you called this performance. I think if we're going to create it, we should actually call it correctness, so reliability, because from the performance aspect, I think that this analyzer has no value. But if you've written a destructive iterator method, which I wrote all the time back when I got to write code, like, enumerating something twice may not give the same result twice, and
why do you say it has no value from a perf perspective?
I mean, I guess it has some value from a perf perspective, but most of the time that you're doing this, you have a backing list, actually. But the case where this really bites you is when you have destructive data and the iteration isn't consistent. So I think it's more valuable as reliability than it is performance. But yes, if you have a last iterator that is expensive, especially if your last is a very big number.
I mean, if you have file.readlines, right?
Is that actually an iterator, or does that create an array?
Yes.
Okay.
There's two versions of it. There's one that returns an array, and there's one that enumerates.
Fair enough. All right. So I guess the performance has value, but I think I would personally say that this is reliability, unless we have a different thing for correctness, because of destructive
performance
reads.
Actually could have value here. One thing I see all the time is people doing for like I equals 0, or I is less than list.count method call. Would this flag that?
Are you saying you're calling list.count?
In the test condition of a loop.
Calling the count method enumerable.count on like list when you
it won't report that. It only report on enumerable, enumerable t, and I ordered enumerable, I think.
So it's actually looking at the type of the local off of which, or the type of the thing off of which the method is called.
To rephrase, is this looking at the type you're passing in, or the method? Because I would expect it to operate based on the argument type, or the parameter type, rather.
Well, I mean, the parameter type is going to be IEnumerable. The question is it smart enough to know that the local was actually a list?
Well, because you're calling enumerable.count, where the first parameter is an IEnumerable. So that's why I ask. I would expect this to pick that up.
But if the local is a list, then IEnumerable.count isn't expensive. It's still more expensive than calling length, but it's not expensive.
No, I think it'd be the count property, but
whichever one, length versus count. I can never remember which is which.
Arrays have length. Everything else has a count.
I kind of like this, at least for the methods defined. I think with the more like cold enumerable like .select, sometimes I've written code that I wanted to reevaluate because there wasn't a whole lot of value in creating a list or something. So it feels kind of like we might have too many false positives if we enabled it for everything else, but at least for these like element at, it seems like it would be only a net benefit.
I'm curious, Shen, have you run this over a large repo that makes more than minimal use of link, like ASP.NET?
I haven't tested over the ASP.NET. I just tested over Roslyn. So are you saying you're expecting to see the count method vs the length method?
Oh no, sorry, I had moved on from count. I was more just questioning the overall noisiness and whether it was noisy or not.
Well, so I feel it's okay because because I think the most false positive comes with if you suppose, if you see a unknown method, your method you write by your own, and you suppose that it will enumerate the neural interface, that will cause a lot of false positive, in my opinion. But if you just try to find if you just try to detect the link method, that's pretty much. I don't feel it's too noisy, but sure, it will cause some false positive if you are passing a list or array into the method. Sure, but I mean, most likely it's not so noisy.
And in an example like the one on your screen, on the screen right now, like number 2, what do we expect a developer to rewrite that to?
What do you mean by rewrite?
Well, it's going to put up a warning, right, or an issue, or a suggestion. It's going to say you're enumerating this multiple times.
Yeah.
What do we want them to do instead?
So I think it could go back to the message. So it will suggest calling some method like toList or toArray. And are you saying we want to provide a code fix for that?
No, I'm wondering if in some situations the cure is worse than the symptom.
So I mean, the most easy part for the code fix is probably to be it's just converting the type to an array or list. Should be fixing that. Is that something you're worrying about? That I feel it's quite cheap and easy to do, right?
Well, creating a list or an array has its own costs.
Sure.
Because the correct thing to do here, from a performance perspective, so going with what it's currently labeled as, is really you would want to as the IEnumerable to something, in this case, indexable. And so you as it to iList, and then if it's not an iList, now maybe call toList. But then the question is seeking again to the 100th element, if we're talking just performance and not reliability, is seeking to the 100th element more or less expensive than cloning the list? Cloning, if the list is a billion items, then toList was the worst call.
If the method had, int I equals collection.element 10, and then int j equals I.element 100, this is going to warn, and it's going to say call toArray or toList. But if you were actually cared about perf, you'd want to enumerate just once with a for loop, calling move next, move next, move next, pulling out the 10th element, pulling out the 100th element, and then disposing of the enumerator. You wouldn't want to allocate an array or a list if you cared about perf.
Right.
It sounds
so
like.
Will the analyzer suggest a solution here?
Well, it sounds like we are proposing a solution would be. Can I type it? So suggesting that we are trying to first cast it. We are trying to first typecast it to a list. If it's not, then we try to convert it. Is that correct?
I mean, well, for one, I agree with you. I don't think a code fixer is. I doubt a code fixer is viable, and it's possible we're just debating the message/documentation around this. My concern is just we push people to a solution that is as bad or worse than the original thing being flagged.
Right.
So
we should
if we're going to do this, we should have a really good documentation page or something that's like, we don't say do X or Y. We basically help to ensure that folks, if they're going to rewrite it, they rewrite it to something that's better than what they had.
I see.
And just suggesting 2-array or 2-list isn't necessarily better.
I see. So, okay. So I will. So I also then. Okay. So I think then we change the message and the document to give the hints to the user. You should first try to convert it to iList or what else other type, and then if it's not, we are trying to convert it to array.
Yeah, I mean, all of this is a little foofy anyway, because just because something's iList doesn't mean it actually has an O1 indexer.
Our mutable
Yeah,
collections,
but
multiple of them don't.
I feel like the assumption is that the indexer would at least give you the maximally efficient way to get to that index.
Well, but I mean, you could have an iList that is implemented as a linked list, and so indexing is order in. And now we're back to Steve's really writing the for loop that just counted the move nexts and grabbed your 10th and 100th element is going to be better than the 110 operations it takes to ask for 10 followed by 100. And so, I mean, ultimately, once things are at an interface, you're making huge assumptions on everything. But certainly, if you model it as this is going to be, a yield return, or everything's going to be order in, we can make some things. But I think that's where Steve's saying, write a documentation page that is like, here's a thing that this would flag. Here are in different ways that you could fix it depending on what you know or don't know, or etc. So asing as an iList may be better than calling 2-list. Certainly it would avoid the memory cost of cloning it, but the performance of indexing it is not actually guaranteed to be O1. There's just guaranteed to be a thing that is called get item that takes an int.
But it's possible I've steered with my question. I've steered us into sort of a niche aspect of this. At the high level, the concept seems fine to me. We could debate the category, we could debate the messages, we could debate the docs, but the idea of preventing multiple enumerations seems, or at least flagging multiple enumerations seems valuable. I'm still concerned there might be situations where it's noisy, where multiple enumerations are warranted, and that's just where it would be great to get some, to really validate this on a few different code bases, just to make sure before we ship it that it's reasonable level of noisiness. Yeah. I assume the default isn't going to be warning. The default will be info or something, right?
The proposal was none.
Okay, that's great. Okay,
I can, as a person who's used ReSharper for years, I can say this is one of the first things I turn off from ReSharper. I find it just to be, it maybe helped me once in my life, and every other time it's been wrong.
I think there's also a difference between potentially the average developer who uses ReSharper and a lot of the people on the BCL team. The feedback that I see on like Discord and other channels is that people love these features and they use them all the time. They use link because they don't want to have to write a for loop themselves, and because they just want the functionality. They don't care how it happens. They often don't even care that it enumerates twice, but they can write the simple code. They can right click and get a code fix that changes it to the quote unquote efficient implementation as needed, and they don't have to think about it.
Right, and again, that just goes back to are we saying that this is performance or reliability? Because from reliability, calling 2-list totally fixes your reliability problem. I mean, granted, we're assuming that that's only ever done once on the IEnumerable at all, but from a performance perspective, if you only care about the first 3 elements and you clone a billion item list, that's probably not right. So performance is hard to validate with the analyzer.
Could this be useful to maybe scope down to just some specific methods? calling like element at, for instance, is a really common mistake I see people make on Discord and things when they're posting link stuff. It seems useful if we could make new developers more successful in using these APIs, but I don't know if we get that if it's off by default. So I feel like this is something that I would enable in my code bases.
I think the issue is that there's a lot of things you can always do, and there's a million different ways to optimize and make it more performant, and most people just don't care. And for most code, it doesn't matter. Like for most code, even a WPF app, enumerating a list twice isn't going to matter that much. You have to be in the hot path and doing something really bad, and that's probably going to be noticeable, in which case you profile and you optimize that one thing is the recommended pattern. So I think it's just a case of giving people the same feature of this is being enumerated twice, here's a quick fix to optimize it to something potentially better. It might not be better, but in the common case it probably will be. And then they go about their day happy or blissfully ignorant of how they could have done it manually.
So what do we need for consensus on this? Do we need more data on usage, or?
Well, the mentioning of the attribute came up, so we can talk about that here and see how we feel about things, and then circle back.
All right. So for the attribute part, I would probably So let me see what I have written. So I will probably suggest 3 attributes here. So the first one is the cost enumeration attribute, which it will apply to a parameter and indicates it will be enumerate, which is easy to understand. So just I'll give an example at my element at. So it will just enumerate the first one, the first argument. And the second would be attributes called link chain, which probably it will apply to a method, and the method is going to take it will suppose that the method will create a new enumerable, which, for example, like select, concate, and all the other stuff. So it will try to call, so for my example here, it will indicate that source 1 and source 2 will be deferred enumerate, and then a new one will be created. So and if you want to tell the analyzer you are going to enumerate some of the parameter, you can combine those attributes together. So and I have another example below. So the next one is just called no enumeration, which probably used to some assert helpers, which I can, and that's the only usage I can figure out right now. So you are just checking the null or something else which does not enumerate anything. So you can use this attributes, or we can by default assume that all the other methods does not enumerate enumerable by default. We can so by that we can probably enumerate these attributes, and and that's the proposal for this part, for the attributes part.
So my preference is we crawl, walk, run here, and given the feedback that we're not yet sure how valuable it is, especially by the very fact that we're talking about it being disabled by default. My suggestion would be we start without. We shouldn't be adding new attributes to link in support of this, and we can add. We just design the analyzer with the possibility of there being attributes in the future, and we don't do anything that would contradict that. But we start by hard coding, or hard coding plus allowing in an editor config file to list additional methods. And then if we find a real need to extend it, we consider the attribute approach. I don't have a strong opinion on the a method that takes an enumerable is considered to not enumerate or is considered to enumerate it. I think we would have to base that on evidence from actually trying this out on lots of code bases to see what the false positive, false negative rate is.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that if we were to expose attributes, we wouldn't want one that says I explicitly enumerate. Enumeration should be likely considered the default, and methods opt out otherwise. There's also not covered here the consideration of things like the list constructor, which takes an IEnumerable. It technically enumerates, but it's also not something that you can like get rid of. It's not an enumeration that you want to get rid of or cache, because list is going to create its own copy of anything you pass in.
Right, but that is an enumeration. So it's if you passed an IEnumerable to new list, and then you called element at on that same enumerable, you've now iterated it twice. So that's when the warning would appear.
Right, and I'm saying that's a case where the warning would appear, but there's nothing you can do.
Well, the call where you get element at off of the interface, you change it to the list that you just cloned it into.
That works in the case where for a list, but it doesn't work for, like, let's say set or dictionary. There's all kinds of scenarios where it's not going to work.
Sure.
And where there is no actual fix for getting rid of the second enumeration.
Yeah, and then back to, again, the one time that it helped me was with a destructive iterator. So don't write those because they lead to hard to diagnose things. The second enumeration is either different data or a null ref, and it's really fun when link null refs. So yeah, I agree in the general principle with Steve that if we were doing the attributes, I don't think we would need both the positive and negative enumeration attributes. We would decide which one's the default and add an attribute to say it's the other one.
Yep.
Because then we have the nonsense of you wrote causes enumeration, comma, no enumeration. Like, great, what's that mean? Yeah. So, I mean, like, as proposed with the hard-coded list, certainly taking Steve's suggestion with editor config, allowing you to specify a list of other methods to include, that would, like, false positive is easy. False negative is also easy if it's not extensible, because any helper that you have that enumerates things isn't going to show up. Unless it's extensible and somebody can figure out how to extend it.
So should we make the default case also configurable through the editor config, or we just make assumption true or false?
I mean, that seems, certainly you could experiment with it, and if you find it valuable, leave it as an option. The trouble is if you have what is the default, then now you need both a list that says consider the following things to do enumeration and then consider the following things to not do enumeration. Because which one you read is dependent on which way the default is set. Yeah, I mean, so it sounds like in general people feel that there is that the analyzer itself has value. As with all these things, the devil's in the details. but it seems reasonable to start. So I seem to be the only one claiming that reliability is a better category than performance. So I'll yield and say we'll call it performance.
Oh, before we move next, can you go a little bit? I think there's one. Can you go down a little bit? Let me see. Can you go just go down? And yeah, so maybe I didn't read that part, but can I share my screen? So there's another case that it's a quick discussion should be. So there's another thing which I think is someone raised that suggestion during the code review. So let me see if I can find that. Let me quickly find that. Oops. Yeah, here, can you see that? So it's Drew. It's Drew's raised this proposal. So he suggests that we should do that based on the generic type of the parameter. Should we implement this, or we just make an easy default case, which is true or false?
Well, I mean, so following the comment, I think it's saying if the enumerable is passed as object, don't count it as enumerated.
Yeah.
And if something is forcing it to be IEnumerable, then count it as enumerated. So
Yeah.
that seems like what I would expect. I don't know that the 2 and 3, like I don't understand 2, because if it's constrained to the element type, that means it was declared as being IEnumerable of T, at which point it's IEnumerable, at which point it's enumerated. So, yeah, I mean, if the parameter, I mean, basically it's, in the analyzer, you have the expanded generic call, I think. And so it's, if the type is IEnumerable at the call, then, yeah.
What does the analyzer do if you accept an object parameter and then you cast it to an IEnumerable? Does it then start tracking that enumerable?
Well, right now it's a object, it's typecasted. If you typecast it to IEnumerable, yeah, it will be tracked.
And is it then tracked as that object, or is it tracked from that cast? So if I were to cast it twice,
it will be tracked. It will be tracked as the typecast. It won't be tracked to the original object.
Okay.
So that'd be a false negative.
False negative,
yeah.
I mean, the suggestion of just 3 here triggering seems reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 would too, because it would the parameter would either be declared as IEnumerable of T, or that would fail to compile. I guess if it took a certain not null of T item, then that's what it's saying. So the call
if it's
site
unconstrained, it's no different than object from, it's
Yeah, my brain loaded that as it was the T was the element type instead of T was the parameter type. So yes, in that case, it could have said the word object, so don't consider it enumerated. That one's actually ugly and harder. Yeah.
All right. And this is the case I want to share. So I will probably stop sharing. And oh, sorry. By the way, is there any meeting notes for this one so that for this meeting, or is recorded?
It is recorded.
Okay.
And, and live. But I'm about to write up the notes if we can agree on them.
I had one question. That there was a comment about shipping this in .NET 6. What does that mean?
So I originally discussed it with Jonathan, and he said that we can ship it in .NET 6 and disabled by default.
You mean add it to like a servicing of the SDK? Is that what that means?
Yeah, I think so original discussion is that we have a servicing fix like 6.2 or 3.00 which ship with every VS release, right? So that's our original planning. So shipping with that with the release of VS and disable it by default. So yeah, and no one can enable it except they explicitly enable it. So does that sound any risk?
I thought, aren't all the analyzers just in a NuGet package?
They're both.
Right, but they're in a NuGet package that we precede in the SDK. So if we just check it in main and the next version flows out, you would just explicitly pull in the next version of the package, which seems fine to me. Why service if you don't have to?
I don't understand. You don't have to resolve to download a NuGet package when you get the new version of the SDK. The rules are all there. They're built in.
Right, but you could, if we just check this in main, you could explicitly reference the next version of the package, and then now
you'd have to reference the package.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess so I don't care. To me, I always hate servicing. Like, the act of going through the servicing process is frustrating, so if I can avoid it, I always do.
Shen, I think that's up to you and Jonathan and Manish and everyone else responsible for that.
Okay, sure. I can.
If that's something we do and we're comfortable doing.
Well, I think the basic idea is to have it shipped, and so that we can gain some user feedback before we enable it. That's the basic idea, because we have we have a lot of the unknown people usage or preference. If we can put it in the product a little bit earlier than .NET 7, we can get more feedback. That's, I think, that's our original idea. Yeah.
I mean, do we have any data on how many people discover and change rules from none to anything else? I would guess the number is quite low. I'm wondering if we're actually going to get feedback if we don't make it IDE suggestion.
I know, but I mean, at least it's better than not ship. I mean, a few people.
Well, I guess I'm wondering it, but we can take it offline. But I'm curious, are we worried about breaking someone? Like, suggestions don't trigger in builds, right? Command line builds. It shows up in the IDE. So I'm wondering if we would be breaking someone by making it, or if it's a performance concern or something.
It's just it's all disabled, right? So why it's it will break someone's build?
No. Sorry, your proposal is to ship it disabled. I'm questioning that. I'm wondering if we're going to put it in the .NET 6 SDK, why not do so as suggestion?
Oh yeah. So basically, what Manish and I worry about is the performance for this part. So
you're worried about impact on builds or on Visual Studio itself.
Yeah, so the most concerning part for us is the performance. So we want to disable it first.
Yes, sir. I think we're going to have to do some legwork to get people to turn it on if we actually want feedback.
It'd be interesting to ship some sort of beta NuGet package of new analyzers that people could subscribe to.
We could also just do, what VS and other preview things do, which is turn preview features on by default in preview and then turn them off by default in release.
All right, so we need a lot of docs. Leave it at performance. We don't care about servicing, and version should use the hard-coded list plus extensibility.
Oh, by the way, what's the final solution? Final solution for the default case? Should we just don't suppose it to flag the diagnostic, or we should?
I mean, I think you need more data.
Okay.
Like,
Okay.
write it. I mean, so my recommendation would be write it, run it over. Steve's suggestion is that ASP.NET is link heavy, so write it with assume everything iterates. Run it over ASP.NET. If you feel like it's almost all false positives, then obviously the default should be
sure.
No.
Yeah, I would try multiple big repos. Try. You said you already tried Roslyn. Try ASP.NET. Try various VS repos. .NET Runtime doesn't do a lot of this, but some of the extensions do. So you could try running it over .NET Runtime. Pick 5 and see what it looks like with various settings.
Sure, we can make a decision based on the maybe error rate, which one is lower, and we choose that. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything that I have not entered into the record? Going once. Twice. Sold. That sounded like approval to me. All right. Thank you, Shen.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
All right. 63130. Make digest size constants public. We don't have Kevin. We don't have Levi. So me. No conflict of interest at all, I promise. So for all of our digest algorithms, whether they be the HMAX or just the simple digests, they all internally have a const that says how big they are because they pass it around to base classes and helper methods and such. But basically everybody's just kind of supposed to know what the answer is. Kevin has rightly questioned why we make people assume things instead of making the values public. So we have two obvious ways we can do it. One is public const, the other is public static read only. I think actually the answer in this case is really const, even though I feel that for public it is usually the wrong answer. But in this case, it's SHA-256 can do nothing other than be 256 bits. If that needed to change, it would be a different algorithm. And since const can be used in other constant expressions, const is more flexible. So I'm voting const over static read only, but I'm open to alternative viewpoints. And then, so hash size in bits and hash size in bytes on all of our digest types, or at least on the class that provides the algorithm. And we're gonna just pretend that we've never had classes that extended the classes that provide the algorithm.
It seems reasonable. We have one-shot hash methods, right?
Yep.
Like static methods, so this would be usable there.
Yeah, so like the implementation of that is if destination dot length is less than hash size and, well, I mean, it'll say hmax size bytes because that's what it's called right now, then return false for the try or throw for the straight right. But and this would basically be the what's the caller precondition is do that. Plus, the big one is we know by knowing that we have a closed system in our libraries that SHA-512 and hmax SHA-512 are the biggest hash we have, so we just have a bunch of stack alloc of 512 shift right 3s all over the place, and instead we can change those to SHA-12 size in bytes, and it would at least explain the magic numbers. So
yeah, it makes sense for me. If now that we have methods that you're not actually instantiating the class to access that property, these are going to be useful.
all right, any contrary feedback? Anyone want to argue about the name? Is anyone alive?
I mean, we do have that existing property. Does the name align with that? Does it need to?
What existing property?
It's called out up at the top. What is it called? There's currently the hash size. Yeah, so.
That would be why they have to pass it all down to their base class. Yeah, I mean, so the base class has the hash size property. Certainly, we had to write in the documentation that it's in bits. So this is, you'd have in the instance dot hash size, and then on the algorithm type you'd have hash size in bits and hash size in bytes. So it seems consistent enough to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
How do we have any other places where we use in bits and in bytes?
I mean, rather than just bits and bytes.
Yeah, or instead of like hash bit length and hash byte length, there's I think we've used bit length and byte length before. I'm trying to think of places where we've used size in before, and I'm not sure we have. I guess we use size and points in system.drawing, but system.drawing is not the best example of good API design. Buffer uses byte length. ASP.NET Core uses bit length.
The class incremental hash has public int hash length in bytes.
Okay. So that uses length instead of size.
And then RSA create has a parameter called key size in bits.
Okay.
So.
Whereas just bit length is in ASP.NET, IoT, CCI, HTTP.
Yeah, so.
You have a bit length in HTTP?
Yeah, it's used as on the encode method, we return a tuple where the second parameter is named bit length. It looks like it's internal though, which it probably also explains why it's got the incorrect casing.
Yeah, so Firefox says we have in cryptography, we have 13 in bitses.
Okay.
And 1 in bytes in public API surface.
I don't have a particular thing against in bits or in bytes. I was just interested in how it compared to others. The suggested alternative would just be like hash byte length or hash bit length, since that looks to be what we use in a few other places as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but
for some reason
no
those
strong preference.
Yeah, for some reason those make my head, like my brain hurts. Probably just because I know that in cryptography the thing that people talk about is just the hash size, and so it's hash size is kind of an atomic word, or I guess an atomic phrase in crypto. But all right. So yeah, so there is prior art in at least in this namespace, so it's matching the local area.
Yeah, works for me.
Looks good.
And we are clear.
So before you say we're done, I don't have an exact issue for us to review, but more of a meta topic. If everyone is willing to spend an extra 10 minutes and then get a half hour back instead of 40 minutes back. But it's the 63547 issue. So, slight meta topic here in that we have a number of places that have taken int or long for API surface simply because that's what existed before native integer and unsigned native integer were introduced. There's a number of places where this can be less efficient, particularly on 32-bit, and there are still places where 32-bit is important for various people. However, there's also the bigger potential issue of we are likely getting ref fields for .NET 7. And that gives us the opportunity to introduce something like native span. And so the general question is, what is the general, so I know where to go with the next steps in writing up the design proposal, is where do we think the correct direction is for these things? Do we think it's exposing individual APIs on buffer that directly take native integers, and same for other places where those APIs exist? Do we think it's exposing potentially a native span type that provides a mirror of span but using native length? And then we wouldn't have to expose anything on buffer, you just do native span.copy2. Or do we think it's worth pursuing the more in-depth topic of should span support native length, in which case you have to do weird things like check casting if you try and get the non-native length. So just wanting to get the general thoughts and feelings from API review here.
I mean, on that last comment, the idea of adding yet another span type, I mean, we still haven't fully proliferated span across everything that we have, and we already have, I don't know how many hundreds of APIs that take span. The idea of having to add another set for a different span is daunting.
Yep, and part of that comes down to we should never have shipped span taking int as the length in the first place.
But we did, so
yes,
we have to live with that.
We did, but also having that basically prevents the use of .NET in some very important areas. Like you cannot use spans to work with arbitrary arrays of bytes. You can't use it in lots of tensor or machine learning areas because you're working with big data. And it's non-trivial to have to chunk and work with it in the other ways. And so you want to have a native span.
I understand the argument for it. I'm saying that adding yet another span and trying to mimic its usage across the framework is, I think, a non-starter.
Yep,
so,
but the key thing there is if we don't, there are at least 3 different user community libraries that are going to do it and that are going to bifurcate the ecosystem anyways.
Yeah, so let's be clear. I'm not saying we shouldn't expose a native span or add the ability for the existing span to accept an enint and expose an additional. And I'm saying if we do the former, if we expose a new native span, I think we need to be very honest with ourselves about how we're going to roll that out at all across all the APIs that currently take span.
Yes.
Which probably feels like it would be async enumerable, which is we put it nowhere other than where we absolutely have to. Is my guess.
Right.
If we made the new type, it would be this goes nowhere. We created it, and it's for community extension.
Although I think realistically we'd end up exposing it in a various number of places anyways. Everywhere we take span today in the BCL, the first thing we do is extract the length and convert it to native integer, because that's needed for perf when you're doing things like integer parsing.
Okay, that's absolutely not true.
Yeah,
all of the core native APIs.
But you said everywhere in the BCL. We've done that nowhere in crypto, and crypto uses span all over the place. So.
Well, crypto's not exactly the actual BCL. That's a higher level library than corelib.
We do that in string and span. That's basically the 2 places we do it.
And all the integer primitives for parsing and formatting, and UTF-8, and the encoding APIs.
Sorry, when I said string, I meant for working with strings. Like the formatting, parsing, whether it's on string or accepts a string in corelib, we do what you're talking about. But that also speaks to the fact that if we do that today, what's the problem with just having the property on span that returns an enint?
Because you have to actually support creating spans that are that big as well.
Sure.
Which means that the regular length now has to become a checked conversion, which may be fine, but it's something that we have to decide if that's the direction we want to try and push for. But it means that anyone, that any API could take a span and then, after iterating, or after it gets the length and tries to iterate through the elements, it will get an overflow exception because the span is more than.
Sure, but the alternative is bifurcate the ecosystem, which we might do ourselves if someone else doesn't do. But if everywhere we have a span, we also have to have native span, and the 2 can't meet because you can't delegate from one to the other without adding that check, which we would do implicitly anyway. Like it seems like we're just kicking the can down the road. Right,
and so I'm personally think that it's fine if we were to say that the best route that we think the best route forward is to extend span and then get the runtime to try and elide the check casts where it can, such as when it knows that the input is constant or the length is constant, etc. And I think that for most code it wouldn't be problematic because most code wouldn't be handling spans that big, and all of our own code internally would be handling via native length, so it would be fine. But I need to know if that's the direction we think is correct, and then I need to write up the proposal with that as the main design rather than native span as the main design point, and then get Jan on board.
Yeah.
I think, from my
Because-
perspective, I think it depends on so there are important but niche use cases for the native span, right? I totally understand like all of the, TensorFlow scenarios or ML scenarios, whatever. Like I totally understand the big data ones are desiring a larger span. I think they are niche but really important. So
Yeah,
the question becomes, how important is it for all of the APIs that operate in terms of span to be able to support those, larger address spaces? I don't see us adding a stream.read overload that works with a read-only native span. So if we want to support that, I think that dictates we go one way. And if we don't care about that and all we care about is having the exchange type, and then people can use that exchange type for their own purposes, I think that dictates another type. If all we care about is the exchange type and people aren't going to be calling stream.read, people aren't going to be, in these niche scenarios, they're not going to be caring about doing, I don't know, whatever, crypto operation or whatever, then maybe having a native span and a few memory extensions for index of and last index of or whatever is sufficient. If we do expect there's going to be a laundry list and a slippery slope of, we need to add this and that and this and that and kind of have full parity, I think that dictates another direction.
My own judgment here is that long term, we're going to end up having more and more places where having the ability to work with larger data is important. Even desktop ISOs are no longer, they're no longer under 4 gigs, and that's standard for all operating systems. Even the latest Ubuntu packages are like 4.7 gigs, unless you explicitly go for the minified version of it. And you run into other problems with span with only int length, such as, you can allocate a ulong array that has, that has half a billion elements in it. That's fine, but now you cannot represent that as a span of bytes, because the number of bytes times 8 is overflow 2 billion. So I think long term the better option would be to make span consistent. Is my own judgment there.
My inclination agrees with you.
Okay.
But I think the devil's probably in the details, and we would need to flesh it out much more fully to understand the full impact.
Agreed.
Yeah. My guess. So if we think it's important and we want to do something other than, make a slice small on bigger span that produces current span, so that you can take your big span, make the small span off of it, pass that into existing things to do chunk work. So if we wanted something other than that, then I think what we would do is on span we would add, I'll call it long length. I'm sure we will debate for hours on what we should actually call it. But we add long length, and then we add an analyzer rule that says don't call long length. And then we make everything in .NET run.
Which one is long
sorry,
length?
we would say don't call length, call long length.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, mouth and brain had differed by a negative. And so we would just write an analyzer that corrects it. We would run it over all of runtime. We would fix what we can. Certainly Net Standard 2.0 will complicate matters for us there. And maybe that means
Span isn't in Net Standard 2.0.
Span is defined for Net Standard 2.0. So any assembly that we cross-compile.
You mean because of the NuGet package?
Right. Yeah, so that may mean that we want to add add some sort of. I guess we can't have a net standard 2.0 get length method that gives you the length without the checked, because we don't have inint in net standard 2.0.
But we still have an issue where we can't add new APIs to that package.
I have no
It's
idea.
not in net standard. It's just system.memory.NuGet, right? Nupcake, I mean.
Yeah, but I mean, we could add an extension. We could add a extension method anywhere that gives it a new returns uint ptr with a duck typed attribute to make it turn into new int get length on current span, that the implementation for net 7 would, or 8 or whatever we get it in, would say return long length, and the implementation otherwise would say return length, and we know it won't overflow because you're not there. Or sorry, because converting that way is safe. Length to long length would be.
I guess I'm not understanding the issue, but we can sort that out later.
Yeah, if we had the analyzer, we'd end up with a lot of cases that it would flag code and say we need to change it, and now we need to put $if in our code for the net standard 2 compiles would need to do. Can't talk about the property that doesn't exist, or field, I guess.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether we just add the property is my point.
That's fair. But yeah, so my guess is if we think it's an important scenario and pervasive, we would just add what I'll call long length and deal with the consequences. Is length on span a field or a property?
It's a property.
Oh, good, we were smart.
And I'd also call this native length rather than long length, since long length implies int64. And native length is the prefix we'd use to refer to native.
Fair enough.
But okay, that sounds good, and at least gives me a direction to go for the proposal as the primary recommendation, which is we'll extend span, we'll take the cost of the check cast. The JIT should be able to elide that in a large number of cases, but not all cases, including just caching it. We already special case caching the lookup in a number of places, so it shouldn't be expensive to do. It's basically a one-time check cast at the beginning of a for loop, so you're not going to see a huge amount of increase. And then as the secondary alternative, I'll suggest the native span and the details that would entail, as if anyone from the runtime team has significant pushback.
Yeah, I mean, the things on the cons list for adding, sure, I'll call it native length, is things like the split compile of what is our answer for both our repository and for other community code of what's the code that they should be writing. I assume net standard 2.0 still a target people use, which means
Yep.
that's still a scenario we need to take into account for usability.
Yep.
And if it's using span as defined from you're writing your code, you're writing your library targeting net standard 2.0, that you're setting yourself up for a lot of checks that didn't used to exist. So your performance slows down by moving to the future, and there's nothing you can do about it. Then that's where figuring out a place to shove an extension method that gives the value back as a inint or new int, or because certainly we're off the map with this type, right? The answer in .NET is lengths are int. That is the signed integer. It makes no sense on a span to be signed, but that's the thing that we work with. Once we move into a native type, then maybe the argument is that it should be the unsigned int, because you're already in complicated world if you're not int. But I don't have a good feeling with that.
I do just want to stress again, I do think it's worth thinking really hard about whether we really believe that we would need this, a native int in, I don't know what the percentage is, but even 10% of the places that we have a span today. If it's less than that, the argument was, well, if we don't ship one, everyone else is there are going to be at least 3 or 4 other libraries that provide their own native span. And they wouldn't be able to plummet to all these other places as well. They might be able to add some extension methods, but presumably they're only, I mean, my gut would be that they're only going to end up having a few core extension methods for the same kind of things that we have on memory extensions. And if that's the case, like if all we needed was to support these more niche libraries was an exchange type and a handful, let's call it, 30 helpers or something, then, maybe that's the way to go. I mean, all the things that were listed, formatting, parsing, no one's going to be formatting a 2 billion digit integer. So like, that probably doesn't matter.
And they certainly couldn't turn it into a string.
Right. And if you expose that slice operation that it gives you back a span, or you have an implicit, we probably don't want implicit cast. You have an explicit cast, or an as span or slice or whatever, slice small, whatever Jeremy called it.
Slice
that allows
small.
you that allows you to interop with that, all the other APIs. Like maybe that is a better direction. So I would encourage you, Tanner, to just like really think through whether we would actually need it in the majority of places we have span, or whether it's really just some of these core primitives and extensions that we would care about.
Yeah, I think the primary consideration there, and I have done a lot of thought into this already, is that if we have a separate interchange type, then yes, you can, for probably most use cases, in even some of the more advanced cases, you can have a few helpers to do the basically to handle the separate 2 billion sized segments, but the one of the key things is that span is often used in perf critical areas, and you don't want to have to constantly be effectively going from native int and then forcing it to forcing the checks to slice it down to an integer sized area, just to then force it to zero extend back internally, because because many of our own APIs are already implicitly taking that int length, casting it to uint, and then having the JIT zero extend that up to inuint.
Well, I mean, we could, regardless of whether we exposed a separate native span or not, we could change span internally to be based on enint. Length could still, we could still expose a native length property, even if we don't have a constructor that accepts an enint. And so you extend it on construction, and then accessing the property forevermore. The new property forevermore doesn't require any extension.
Yep.
Right. Change the field. Leave so the int property would do the casting.
The int property would do the casting, which would be safe, because we would know by construction that it could never have been created with an overflow value. And then we would have a new property that would allow avoiding the truncation.
Yeah, because as long as only int went in, we'd know that only int could come out. And then someone would probably just have to special case that in the JIT to say, look, we promise.
Yep. Okay, so I'll make sure to cover both of those topics in the proposal write-up, and then I'll try and get some discussion time with Jan to see what his opinions are as well.
Cool.
All right, thanks.
All right. Anything else? Okay, well, I assume the slate is still clean. The slate is still clean. There are no additional topics. And, wow, we're going to actually finish early. So, hope everyone has a good day, and that's all.
Bye-bye.
For a while
gavel.
since I've seen the gavel, so it makes me laugh.
Yep. Weirdest thing I've ever received in the mail that I didn't order.
Thank you.